Alrighty, welcome back to Cinema Pursuit, where in the pursuit of cinema, we talk about the movies that we love. And today we are talking about Star Wars Revenge of the Sith, a 2005 movie directed by the great George Lucas. And this is a movie I saw in the theaters in 2005, and now we were able to see it again 20 years later in a re-release in the theater. Dolby Atmos, saw it with Zach, Kat, and a bunch of other folks. We had a great time with the movie. And I am solo today, but the conversation of film is never one-sided. I'd love to hear everybody's thoughts about this one. And I would drop a series ranking of movies. We typically do that, whether it's a Spielberg or a Fast and Furious, whatever we're talking about, if it's that sort of cultural thing. We do drop rankings, but I'm not going to with this, because in the last decade, we've had such a dilution, such an exponential growth of Star Wars that you can't exactly put it in a box anymore, and everybody's got their opinions about this and that, and there's still a perseverance of great storytelling within it all, but comparing it is apples to oranges, so I'm not going to do that today. I will say I am watching Andor Season 2 right now. I just rewatched Season 1. Andor Season 2 is currently dropping, and it is a reminder of how these stories, they are from Lucas's point of view about this world and everyone else who's come subsequently after that, that these stories are a reflection of our humanity and our times on Earth right now, and that's what the great storytelling does. I get reminded constantly that I am a Star Wars fan, and I have to remind folks that if you love something, you do not tear it down. You can you can say what you want about things. You can have substantive opinions about things that you think about them and you say, oh yeah, I don't agree with that. That doesn't work for me, but I understand why it works for someone else, and I can't find myself being so negative about that. That is something that the Star Wars fandom has to learn for themselves. And I think one of my favorite things in the last about 5 years is that, things like TikTok and all that, I realized that there's a whole fandom of, women out there that who are fans of Star Wars, bigger fans of Star Wars than I will ever be. And they have grown up on the prequels like I did. And they have such a love and such a substantive conversation to be had with those movies, with the original movies, everything that's come afterwards, where I'm like, this is where the fandom is. Like, they definitely understand these things, and they understand the concepts that Lucas was going for, and they have a love for this world, and they're not tearing it down like a lot of folks are. They're like, oh, this is not my Luke, and this, and it's just a negative conversation that I frankly don't want to have here. And I will probably talk about it yet again at some point during the pod, but I just want to make sure folks know that we're not going to be negative on this. I do want to say I unlocked a memory about what happened in the era of like 2005 to at least 2014 in my head was this era of hatred. And I do want to call it hatred, or like dunking on George Lucas. That people, they saw the prequels, and there's a lot of vitriol when it came to the conversation of George Lucas. And I think after that point, realized who George Lucas was and had a lot of resources about listening to him talk and everything else in between. And I realized that what people were talking about when it came to George Lucas himself was not correct. I think they lost the message on he was just an easy target when the man was trying to do something earnest. Everything that he's done with Star Wars was always about hope. It was about stories that reflect the world that we live within. And they all have stories about the morals and values that we have and the reflections that we have within our actions compared to those. And everything else after that is also commendable work. That he's talking about the rebels. He compares the rebels to the Viet Cong at that time, and he compares the empire to fascism and oppression, right? That oppression, one of my favorite lines from Andor is that oppression is a mask of fear. one of the great characters in that show, he has a great thing that he talks about. It's like tyranny requires effort. It breaks, it leaks. Authority is brittle. Oppression is a mask of fear. Remember that. It's like, it just gives me goosebumps because it's like everything that we talk about, even in our real world aspects, is that there are systems at hand that are trying to keep people in boxes, that are trying to keep people divided, and the violence that pursues after that is something that should be studied because it's being used to distract us or it's being used to divide us as humans. And there's an acuity to the themes in Andor where I hope that George Lucas was proud, like, oh yeah, these guys are really doing something that I thought of, and they're taking it a little bit further. Like, I was trying to do this with the prequels, and maybe I didn't get there, but they definitely got there, and I'm proud of them. It's like what they did with Andor is they're using the lore of Star Wars to tell human stories. And there's tragic stories of intentions and actions and what a rebellion fundamentally is. And there's so many different avenues to explore within that. And Andor is one of those. Star Wars Rebels is another one. And it all comes together for me to be like, it lights a fire under you for me. And like, it's a feeling of genuine need, a genuine urgency to my life, to my world, that I hope that other people get. That these stories are not just stories, that these stories are parables, these stories are lessons to be learned and reflections of our lives. And George Lucas spent so much of his time building up a trilogy of movies because he remembered that there's still story to be told. And then he made Clone Wars, and Clone Wars was yet another piece that needed more storytelling told. I grew up on the prequels. I grew up on that era of Star Wars, of prequels were on TV, like Phantom Menace was on TV, Cartoon Network had the show Clone Wars, and I became a fan of this stuff. I had a little old Jar Jar Binks inflatable chair. I had the little like milk, like cereal bowl of like Anakin Skywalker, and I grew up a product of that era. Yeah, I've seen all of these movies a bunch of times, and the things that George Lucas meant for the kids were always there, and I always enjoyed those. And I didn't even know about the original movies besides playground talk of, we'd be like essentially not cosplaying, but like playing around like, oh, I'm like, my favorite character was always like, I want to be Mace Windu. Like, let me be Mace Windu. It was like that sort of thing, We were made fun for it, but we loved what we did. And there's a lot of fond memories of the prequels in that era of Star Wars because that's what I grew up on. And on the playground talk, I'd hear like, oh, like Luke's father is like Anakin Skywalker and this and that, and the like, Vader. And there's things that I always knew about Star Wars because of my friends, and it took a long time till like, it was Channel 64. I still remember like Spike TV, now Paramount, like they were showing the original trilogy. I still remember A New Hope ending and then Empire Strikes Back starting, and I watched all three of them all together on TV. And that is something where it's like, it came afterwards, but I was always a fan. I always loved this stuff because it did end up being that my mom, I was very lucky that my mom took me and my brother to go see it when I was 9. We got to see Revenge of the Sith in theaters when I was 9, and I can never forget that. And, seeing it 20 years later makes me even more grateful for that memory because, like, my mom was always working hard and, she literally fell asleep watching she fell asleep watching Revenge of the Sith, and I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. That checks out, 20 years later. And seeing in theaters now, Zach was joking about, he's like, oh, this is real John Williams right here. This is the stuff that, John Williams had such a sauce to work with. And it does sonically, with the work that he does in this movie, it distills the story of Anakin Skywalker and the fall of the Jedi in a way that, we saw it in a massive screen, 2-story screen with the Dolby Atmos sound. And it just like reminds me, that 20 years later, this movie's 20 years old, but this is cinema. Cinema matters, and cinema should be seen on the biggest screen, the biggest sound, the biggest everything possible. And I'm grateful for the experience to see it again. And this movie, it made another $50 million in a re-release. And it shows that time and time again that George Lucas was that guy. That film just happened to be the art that he chose. The last time I saw the level of filmmaking that I saw with Revenge of the Sith on the big screen was Furiosa. I think Sinners just came out. I think that is a relative, that's definitely up there. That's that level of visionary filmmaking that is moving the culture forward. It's moving the filmmaking aspect forward in front of the camera and behind the camera. And that's the sort of thing I always love seeing. And it just feels like you're watching the movie inside someone's mind, that this is the pure flow of information from their mind, and that is something to be said. That is something beautiful. And it's like movies are not made by one person. Definitely. It's like I talk about Ryan Coogler. I can rattle off Ruth Carter for his costumes, Hannah Beachler, Autumn Durald Akrapa. He has a group of people with him making these movies, and so does George Lucas, so does George Miller. And these people, they make movies, and I can't label what they do as being good or bad because they're aiming to transcend and push boundaries that have been set. And when you're vying for greatness, sometimes you get there, sometimes you don't. And there's things that are done in the prequel trilogy where if those innovations were not made in the filmmaking process or even in the release standard of like the theater system, because they're pushing like digital projection at this point, what we have right now would not be done. Because by the time digital projection was pushed, and that is by 2009, majority, like when Avatar came out, majority of the theaters had digital projection. And we have to see that from a business standpoint, distribution standpoint, and I guess from the toy sales standpoint, that this is a real art that what George Lucas was pushing, and he definitely changed the way that we see movies nowadays. When it comes to George himself, I do think that he's a great idea guy, but I think some of the execution with some of the finer details they've just never been in his bag. I think everybody knows that the icon Carrie Fisher, as she played Leia in the original films, or in all the films she's played Leia, that she would sit there on set rewriting her lines. And even Hamill and Harrison really did not like saying some of Lucas's dialogue, but they worked on their dialogue. They were trying to figure out, they're trying to make it better. And for better or worse, that makes it into this movie. It makes it into Revenge of the Sith, and it feels odd at times for me. And you feel it the most with Padme and Anakin, because that conversation that they're having through the movie, and it is one conversation to me that we're having a child, and he sees that he's going to be having kids, and he's dealing with a moral dilemma, and Padme is trying to keep it right, and there's such a conversation that's compelling that's being had there, but the way that we see it, it can be a bit oddball in a sense. It's not, it just feels melodramatic, almost like they wrote this out of a need and not out of an art. So I think the thing is that for me, like what I've realized with rewatching this is that George Lucas has such a visual brain, and it feels like he doesn't even need the dialogue. I was rewatching the opening of the movie in the theater, and I was like, wait, it's like we're pulled in, and I'm like having such a great time with it, and then it cuts to dialogue. I'm like, wait, we didn't even need that dialogue. And I'm like, it keeps you at pace with what's happening with the story, and you need to have dialogue for some folks, but I think that he could have cut a lot of this dialogue, and it just could have been the same movie. And for me, in my book, that's such a compliment. That George Lucas's visual storytelling is so great that we are attuned to what's happening without any dialogue, and that would have been awesome to see. But it's like George Miller made Mad Max Fury Road to be a movie where you can just have the score, you can watch it, you don't need dialogue, you just need the visuals. And that is that visionary storytelling that Lucas had, but maybe it wasn't of his time. Maybe he didn't want to do that. And that's the difference between different people and different visionaries. They have different opinions as to how they approach things. And Obviously, when it comes to those visionaries, like Miller, he has these themes flowing through Mad Max. Of course, there's themes coursing through all of George Lucas's movies that shine, and a need for dialogue within all of that. But their regular action beats, the romance work, the angst of falling into the dark side, there's certain little things that could be done better. And that's just like the finer details. I find myself thinking about, like, okay, I know Natalie Portman is a great actress. I enjoyed Hayden Christensen in Jumper, like, a movie he did after this. And it's like, is it a casting issue? I don't know what it was. I don't know where the sauce was. Did they need to fight back with Lucas about some of that dialogue? I don't know what it was, but there's definitely something there that leaves me wanting more. But like I said, that's substantive criticism that I will always think about, but I don't think I even have a solution for it besides, going and writing it myself. But that being said, let's get into action is the juice, because with Revenge of the Sith, the action is the juice. The most juice scenes of Star Wars Revenge of the Sith. The scenes I want to talk about the most are the ones that essentially plague the Jedi and Stormtrooper, like the Clone Trooper storylines, as you go on to Star Wars Rebels, Bad Batch, Mandalorian, and that is Order 66. We come to the point where Palpatine is forced from his shadows, and he is essentially having a face-off with Mace Windu, Kit Fisto, 4 of the Jedi Masters, and Palpatine proceeds to murder 3 of them, and Mace Windu gets Palpatine down. Anakin walks in, and he's already in his feelings, and Palpatine had him perfectly primed that, you can't kill Palpatine and this and that. Mace Windu has his own experiences with the dark side of the Force, and he knew the plague that Palpatine would bring. And what Palpatine was bringing to the galaxy is an oppression of the galaxy, exterminating the light side of the Force, and Anakin ends up siding with him, and Palpatine murders Mace Windu, so they say. Because, in my opinion, Mace Windu is alive. Mace Windu, since I was a kid, since I saw this movie, I was in 4th or 5th grade, I still remember going to school and be like, yo, guys, I swear, it wasn't guys, it was just me and my one friend, Willie, and I was like, hey, man, I know for a fact that Mace Windu is alive, and this is before they got bought by Disney or anything. I don't want to see a spinoff. I was just like, I love Mace Windu, and I know this man could not be killed. You can cut off his hands, but you cannot kill this man. I love Sam Jackson in that role, and it's always been in my head that, Mace Windu is alive. But back to Order 66. It's like the tragedy of this turn, in this scene with Mace, is that it is Anakin turning, right? He turns into Darth Vader. He's lost his soul at that point, and he proceeds to become resolute within what he's thinking, that Padme's life is more valuable than anyone else. He proceeds to go and pew pew, or boom boom, children. That was a lightsaber sound, and he does that thing to the kids, the younglings, and then obviously does it to the Separatists and a bunch of other Jedi, and he essentially is the fall of the House of Cards of democracy. And it's fascism prevails. And this scene and the rest of the movie, after this scene with Mace and Order 66, is the climax of the Skywalker story, that this is the loss of Anakin's soul. And you can say these are 9 movies, 6 movies. For George Lucas's point of view, these are 6 movies, and this is the peak of that story. That he meant to tell this story, and that if Anakin was a chosen one, he became Vader, and he got lost in his despair. That he was told that his kids are dead and all this stuff, and by the time we get to Return of the Jedi, that's the end of this story, that he finally realizes that he does have his son, and the redemption there is that he does take out the dark side, that he does take himself out and his master Palpatine out of the, Darth Sidious out of the equation. So it's for that, this is the climax. And this narrative has always stuck with me as a kid, like this point of it all. And the end of Anakin and the rise of Vader is the tragedy of Star Wars that just keeps creating tragedy. And that's how it is in the world, that when you have tragedy, it typically begets more tragedy, that violence begets violence, hatred begets hatred, oppression begets oppression. And it's like all these negative feelings of anger and dismissal and hatred, everything transgresses into something worse. And there's themes of purpose, themes of family, themes of abandonment, that Anakin's mother abandoned him more or less. Not that she meant to, you know. Qui-Gon abandoned him after that too. Obi-Wan did the best he could. Ahsoka did the best that she could. Padme did the best she could. But it's like the past that you have and being manipulated by an inhuman spirit that was Darth Sidious will cause you to become something that's worse. And for me, the way that I see it is that in my culture, we talk about it, that it's like Palpatine is a demon. He's a Rakshas. He is exactly what a demon is. That demons do not look like, you know, they don't have 10 heads and all these things. They are people who are charismatic. Demons are personable. He's a chancellor. He's a person of power, position, and fame. He's someone who's attractive because of those qualities. And that is how they corrupt the light side. That is how, even if you're powerful, you become corrupted, because the dark side, even in life, is quite compelling, quite easy to fall into. And we don't see those conversations about these things as much in the movie, but you know what Lucas and Filoni and what everyone has done on the Clone Wars side of things, like the show itself, was they humanize and characterize Anakin so well. And they really show you that as much as there was pain in Anakin's life, there was also a love. And he had such a compelling vision of himself. You know, he's always, you know, so much fun, but he also had a dark side. By the time we get to Return of the Jedi, obviously he redeems himself in his last seconds alive, and he stops the depravities that he and Palpatine had perpetrated to bring a peace to the galaxy. And there's something that I always talk about. It's not something I choose to talk about necessarily, I'm going to talk about this movie and it has this theme, but it's like there's an overarching theme about all the movies that we talk about that I think that I hope everyone agrees with me on this, is that people have the potential for change, that despite all odds, we can improve and we can make sure that we are not defined by our worst moments. And of course, Vader/Anakin does terrible things, but they also have done good things, and the judgment upon that character is not for us or for anybody to be had, but it's a lesson to learn that despite all the terrible things he did, the hope was that he finally did the right thing and he fulfilled his prophecy by the end of his life. And my second scene for Action of the Juice goes right into a continuance of Order 66, which is Obi-Wan trying to figure out what happened. He goes to the temple on Coruscant. He sees that it's his Padawan, it's his brother that has perpetrated this violence, and he sneaks aboard Padme's ship. Obviously, he doesn't know where she's going, but he knows that she is going to Vader, to Anakin. And after assaulting Padme, Obi-Wan and Anakin have a standoff. And they are brothers at arms having a fight for fate. That it's either we see the galaxy go into this whole issue of oppression and pain, or we don't see that happen. And I think it's something where it was an inevitability that someone of the dark side would try to do something like this, that if the light side of the world gets antiquated, if you get into a pattern where you're too secure of what you're doing, then that'll cause elements to come out that are of an opposing side and of opposing force. Meaning that if you, and we see it in real life where people are in power and they think that just because they have that power that they can do whatever they want and they might help people just as a byproduct of it, that they become complacent. And that complacency brings a rise to a hatred that, like, just because you all have this doesn't mean that you are any less responsible than you were when you got that power. And people will act the way that they're going to act, but it's like, I feel like there was an inevitability to the complacency of the Republic, or complacency that you see within democracy that does happen, that there's a vigilance that is not there, that's fighting for humans, that's fighting for our existence and prosperity, that we should be growing together rather than divided, in a sense that it's complacency that also brings that. And that's something that the Chancellor preyed on, that if you give people an edge to be marginalized, then you'll give them an edge to become powerful when they unite in a opposing force of hatred or division. So it's so interesting and it's so tragic, the story that Lucas is telling here. And he also gives you the fun of it all and the action and everything in between. But when it comes to the end of this movie, it's pure tragedy that ends with hope because we know what's coming. But even if you didn't, there is a bit of hope that he ends with. But this scene right here, it's meme to the end. You're like, Anakin, I have the higher ground. It's like, we know what it is. And it gives me goosebumps to think about it, because it's like you can know someone and grow up with them and feel like you're in the same place and same values, same system. You know, the Jedi Code, you grow up with that, and they grew up together. Obi-Wan and Anakin grew up together. And for them to go so opposite in directions, it hurts. You know, it really hurts. And the hope is that Anakin comes back. He does return. But do people ever return from this sort of loss? It really feels like something that George Lucas pulled from, I don't know if he pulled it from his real life, but he pulls it from the stories of humanity, that there is sometimes tragedy that occurs that it's like one of the lines that I'll never forget. It's like, you were my brother, Anakin. And that is another thing we always talk about, is like brotherhood. It's about you, like these different systems of how we are united within this world, and brotherhood is one of those. And to have that loss, we never talk about it. What Obi-Wan lost himself it's a massive loss for him. And obviously I'm not trying to equate pew pew like the bad acts that Anakin and Vader do to the loss of a brother, but it is a loss nonetheless that should be explored. So I love these scenes in Revenge of the Sith because they bring this level of emotion to me, and I think that these scenes are great, and this is exactly what Lucas wanted to get to. But it's like you have to set up every single other thing. And the complacency I'm talking about when it comes to the Republic, when it comes to all of these little cogs of bureaucracy, Lucas explores them through the 3 movies, and he shows you what happens, right? That a republic, a democracy will fall with, a laud, with a clap, with appraisal of greatness, that they think this is good, that this is the right thing to do. And that is another scary part. It's like Lucas is, teeming with little ideas like, hey guys, make sure you remember this. Hey guys, remember this. Remember the little details, because you're going to see these in real life. And 20 years later, I'm like, oh, read history, read the news. You see these things happening. You see these things happen in my real life. These things come back to us and they affect us. And I'm like, wow. There's a point where I was rewatching this in theaters and Yoda's talking and I'm like, whoa. I literally said, I was like, wow. And these themes, they wow me. So action is the juice. George Lucas, one of the greats. Alrighty, on to production value. Production value! What is the production value for this movie? So many great artists behind the screen. What is the most impressive piece of this movie? Whether it's a shot, scene, moment where you feel like everything is left on screen, nothing's on the sidelines. What screams production value for Revenge of the Sith? For me, it most definitely is the opening 20-25 minutes of this movie. From the get-go all the way to when they crash down on Coruscant. We open the movie, and from the crawl we come down to Coruscant, above Coruscant, and Obi-Wan and Anakin are on the way to General Grievous' ship. There's this war going on, and there's just so much CG. It is crazy spectacular work, just bringing you into this massive battle with the Separatists and the Republic, and truly a visual feast. Hats off to the VFX work in this movie. I'll get into it in a minute, but we keep going. We get a lot of R2-D2 shenanigans, great moments between Obi-Wan and Anakin, everything that you really want. And we get the story beats. We get a redux fight of what happens at the end of the last movie at Clone Wars. Anakin gets his hand cut off by Dooku, but we're coming back now. And a little rematch, which ends with Anakin being pressured and murdering Dooku. And we get this beautiful moment from Christopher Lee as Dooku where he looks at his master, he looks at Darth Sidious, and he's like, "Et tu, Brute." It's like, you're really going to kill me for this kid. Unbeknownst to Anakin, he's the one replacing Dooku at that moment. So, levels to it, and obviously there's the iconic line of, "Do it!" which everybody loves, which I love too, but, great laughs rewatching it in the theaters with that one. So, obviously they're trying to get off the ship, and the hijinks with the elevator again, going back to the cockpit, and Grievous has got his other guys there, and good little fight there, and then they have to crash land on Coruscant, and it just feels like everything within the first 20-25 minutes is running so smoothly, like a Ferrari, except some of the little bits of dialogue. Everything else is perfect. I really, really enjoy the opening of this movie. Just I was smiling, ear to ear, smiling, watching it in the theaters. Technically, behind the screen, we have this insane work from the VFX that's from ILM, Industrial Light and Magic. If you haven't seen the documentary Light and Magic, it is on Disney+. It is quite literally a company created by George Lucas in 1975 out of a necessity, and it's almost like a real-life version of the Rebels, where it's like the ragtag team gets together and they create their own vision and own company, and they do something that hasn't been done before, and that always is giving light to more and more work. All these years, you can say Jurassic Park and bring it all the way to what they're doing today, which is a lot of massive work. If you don't know, when it comes to visual effects themselves, a lot of that stuff is being put off into other countries, whether it's like a Korea or India, and a movie might have 2,000 VFX shots, and that level of work, it's a lot of work, and they just divide it up between different houses, VFX houses, and how do you expect one company to have the same work as another company, and putting it all together in one movie, how do you make it cohesive as a visual movie? So, a lot of difficulties nowadays. Roger Deakins on his podcast, he had on a couple people who are visual effects artists who have now retired, and they used to work for ILM, and they're like, yeah, I was like, I could not do this. Like, having 1,000 shots on a movie is crazy. To, have, like, Revenge of the Sith has literally 2151, yeah, 2,151 VFX shots, and of those, 1,269 are animated. And it is, by that point, in 2005, probably the most amount of VFX shots in a movie at that point. Because Phantom Menace had 1980, Attack of the Clones had 2000, and then this one's jumping both of them with 2151, and they're slowly adding like 10, 20 minutes of VFX work there. And if you have 800 CG characters, 50 3D environments, you have to imagine the amount of work that went into VFX when it came to Revenge of the Sith. And John Nolan, his whole entire crew, really pulled off a feat that it was pushing cinema forward. It's like, if you don't have this, you don't have Avatar, right? You slowly have to build to those things. And the visionaries, they're always trying to push us like, hey, this is possible. Let's figure this out. And it's like, there's a lot of people that'll say, hey, no, that's not possible. That's not possible. It's like, yes, it's possible. It's possible when we go out and do it. We figure it out. We push the needle. We push it forward. If you're pushing the envelope creatively, it does show. And inspiration is taken from that. So I love that. The costumes in this movie, Trisha Bigger, everybody, Count Dooku, Palpatine, Obi-Wan, Anakin, Padme. Like, Padme slays always is slaying. And it's like the entire costuming work through these 3 movies is just exactly what you want from this era and defines this era. And it's almost simple and elegant when it needs to be. It's like there's different layers depending on which character we're looking at. And the sets themselves, like Gavin Boquet, his production design goes crazy, and he's gone on to do some other interesting work. And I think there's one person for production value I've been sitting quietly on. And the 20 minutes is fantastic at the opening of this movie, but the person that really hits the mark is John Williams. He's the score at the beginning of the movie. Sucks you right in. Obviously, the titles. One is the titles for a Star Wars movie, not production value. And from that, straight into the battle, and every little bit from the action to the tension that John Williams does. Always fantastic. I love that man. I love his work. It's a big sound movie for me, and I'll get into it in a minute. But before we get to that, let's get into some actual dialogues. The dialogues in this movie, what pieces of dialogue affected me the most? What pieces of dialogue did I love in this movie? I want to cut right to a scene between Yoda and Anakin that we get in this movie. And my reaction to this scene was like, oh wow, I didn't expect that. And I'll get into it. Yoda. Premonitions. These visions you have. Anakin. They're of pain, suffering, death. Yoda. Yourself you speak of, or someone you know. Anakin. Someone. Yoda. Close to you? Anakin. Yes. Yoda. Careful you must be when sensing the future, Anakin. The fear of loss is a path to the dark side. Anakin. I won't let these visions come true, Master Yoda. Yoda. Death is a natural part of life. Rejoice for those around you who transform into the Force. Mourn them not. Miss them not. Attachment leads to jealousy. The shadow of greed, that is. Anakin. What must I do, Master Yoda? Yoda. You must train yourself to let go of everything you fear to lose. It really hit me, like this bit of dialogue. Like, sorry for the Yoda voice, that's just a bad one today, but like, Yoda makes me feel like Lucas very much was into Eastern philosophy, Eastern religion, and Yoda talking about the inevitability of death and accepting it, not mourning the people. And the inevitability of death is something that we can't fear. And there's a whole conversation to be had about the mourning part, moving on, and everything else between that in our own lives, but I'm not going to talk about it. The relevant part to the Jedi, to the Star Wars, is that attachment leads to jealousy. Jealousy is a shadow of greed. And that line really stuck with me, because the Jedi are pretty much trained to be selfless to some extent and not given to their anger. They're not allowed to have attachments because for them it strays them from the light side of the Force. It's a bit monastic, and upholding that, even though Obi-Wan, like Anakin, obviously has his thing with Padme, but even Obi-Wan deals with it himself in Clone Wars, that Satine Kryze, the ruler of Mandalore at that point, Bo-Katan's sister, for anybody who knows the other Star Wars stuff, Obi-Wan has a bit of romance with her, and he never gave into it, and he had such a relationship with her that she is the one who calls him Ben. And everything that happens with them happens, but nothing where Obi-Wan is betraying his character. And the terrible part is that it is Darth Maul who yet again comes and takes away someone that he loves. And he takes over Mandalore for some time, and Ahsoka comes in and resolves that situation, but that's a romantic attachment. And the other attachment is the attachment of jealousy, ego, greed. With greed specifically, greed for power, greed for power, position, and to be taken more seriously. And you see those all played out within Anakin. And Anakin has the audacity to think that he can stop fate. And at the moment where he thinks he can stop fate, he plays right into the fate incorrectly, because his failures come from hatred. Even Dooku says at the beginning of this movie, in the first 20 minutes, that it's like, I sense great fear in you, Skywalker. You have hate, you have anger, but you don't use them. And the anger and the hatred that he has accrued through his life and the frustrations he's having at that current moment, Palpatine weaponizes those issues. When people are angry, when we're not valued, when we're fearful, when we're angry, it is the easiest time to take advantage of somebody. Even with good intentions, you can be lost to the wind. You can become Vader. And we can never be lost in those issues in our lives. We can never become Vader. Because if we're like Vader in our lives, we gotta recognize that. Introspection, retrospection. We gotta learn to get back to the light side of the Force. And Lucas is out here just dropping life lessons. If you dive into it, you can see him, and it's just really tackles the beauty of what the conversations are that we can have within Star Wars. And it's like the other dialogue is obviously John Williams. And John Williams, the Layla, is fantastic in this movie. I will say, one of the first things that Zach said to me when we were in the theater was like, hey, this is real John Williams right here. Meaning that, like, he had something thematic to work with, and there's just such a sauce to the work that he does in the prequels. And we've talking about Mr. Williams already on this pod. We've already done the Jaws pod. We had a lovely time giving him his flowers there, and obviously he's such an icon and created such a world of pop culture. But real quick, if you love John Williams, like, go and watch. It's called Music by John Williams. It's on Disney Plus. Go check it out. It's something where my buddy is a teacher, and he told his band teacher at his school, he's like, hey, there's this new documentary out. You got to show it to the kids. And the band teacher showed it to the kids. It's awesome. And it's one of those great things where it's like, John Williams, for me personally, genuinely, is one of the greatest composers of all time, full stop. You know, mention your Bach, Mozart, Debussy, Mahler, Tchaikovsky, Strauss, Beethoven, John Williams. Like, up there, he's in that line of genius. And I feel such a more intense intimacy from John Williams' work. And there's a whole thing because of the connection of cinema that he has. And it's like, Star Wars wise, Empire probably has the best work of music, but this is probably the second best work he's done in all the 9 Star Wars movies, even though the other 2 prequel movies have beautiful work that people literally walk out to on their wedding days, and intimate, beautiful work. I will say, if I ever have a downfall, if I'm ever going to the dark side in life, let John Williams score my downfall. Because it's just like, oh, maybe it's a good thing for this downfall. That's what it feels like, but it's not. But you get what I mean. But Anakin's betrayal, it's beautiful and heartbreaking. And John Williams understands that emotion. He understands that tragedy, and he delivers on it. The score that's towards the end of the movie, there's a few names that go around, but 3 pieces, the names Battle of Heroes, Anakin versus Obi-Wan, and the immolation scene. And from those specifically, we see where the emotions of the relationship sonically come and go. This is just something purely epic and emotional about this turn to the dark side. There's a reason why we're so compelled by this. And ultimately, it's the end of this brotherhood. When you sit there and you go through the score of this movie, you don't have to watch the movie, but you can tell what's going on just because the emotional beats that John Williams has in his work are all there. It's all present perfectly. And it's just the intimacy of the emotion of John Williams' work is reflective on how he works and how he feels and how he picks up the emotions of the scenes he sees. Because we don't know what the emotion is for a scene, but he watches the movie. There's no sound in there. There's no temp track. John Williams don't need a temp track. And it's like, oh, yeah, this moment, this emotion, I've got to do this, and how do I do... It's like, there's such a understanding of cinema that he has, just as a Spielberg, just as a Scorsese, that John Williams has, where he has work that gives us the emotions of cinema. And he probably understands the medium of film more than majority of people who have ever worked in it. He's not a legend by coincidence or happenstance. He is a legend because his work speaks for himself. It sings for itself. And this is the one where it sings all of the emotions in this movie perfectly. And we are so insanely lucky to have John Williams. And he always packs in the sauce where it needs to be and delivers on it. And we'd be ever so lucky to have him make any score, period. And what he's given us at this point, he's getting up there. I don't know if he's ever going to score again, but, you know, if it's all said and done, he's given us too much. I do think the music in this movie is perfect, but let's talk about some of the casting in this movie. You know who should have been in this movie? Let's recast a role in Star Wars Revenge of the Sith. Who would you put in this movie? Who would I put in this movie? I don't have anybody to talk to today about this, even though this is one of my favorite things to do with other people around. We even do it over on the commentary podcast randomly. I'll just bring it up because I love doing it and it's working. You know, like Spielberg says, half his job is casting. It just feels like something you want to do. And I went with recasting Star Wars Revenge of the Sith in a modern take, in a sense, modern contemporary recasting. So, Anakin Skywalker, who are we going with? I'm going with Timothée Chalamet. And it feels almost like a corny pick or something because he's such a timely, relevant person, but it's just because what we've seen from him in Dune and everything else he's done, he's a compelling actor and he could play this role to a T. He could play it perfectly. That rise and that fall, it's something he's already doing in Dune.
and he would be awesome. Obi-Wan, I wanted someone British. I wanted someone compelling that could really carry that brotherly role, and I thought of Kit Harington at first, but I went with Daniel Radcliffe, who obviously we love from Harry Potter and every other thing he's been doing with his illustrious career as a character actor at this point, and he could deliver that Space Jesus vibe of Obi-Wan. He can be funny, he can do the drama, and it would just be a great fun to see Obi-Wan as Daniel Radcliffe. Next one, obviously Padme. I thought of Rachel Ziegler, Kaylee Spaney, people I love, and ultimately I had to go with Daisy Edgar-Jones, who something where it's like Twisters is a movie where obviously she's had normal people and a few other things, great things she's been in, but for the most part, every time she's in a movie with another actor and she has a runtime that's comparative to that individual, she's always pushing ahead and taking authority of her character, her story, and Padme has always been that. She's always been the one trying to take authority of her life and her character, so I would have loved to see Daisy Edgar-Jones as Padme. She could do something great, something so compelling with that character, and just having her and Timmy working together, Anakin Padme, I feel like that would bring such a sauce, even though maybe you have that George Lucas dialogue, maybe they figure it out for themselves how to make it better. So I would have loved to have seen those two as Anakin and Padme. Next one for me, Mace Windu. I love Mace Windu. Man's alive. I gotta recast one of my favorite characters. I'd recast Mace Windu from Samuel L. Jackson to Jimon Honshu, another favorite actor of mine. He's in Gladiator, among many other things, and he would bring that same level of skepticism and bruteness, almost this intensity, to the Jedi Council that's needed, a skepticism that's needed, and ultimately the person who confronts Palpatine. So it's like he's got the sauce he always has, and it would have been awesome to see him as Mace Windu. Next one, we have a lot of clone troopers, different personalities. Tamora Morrison does a great job with it, but for me, if I wanted another actor to play that role and play all these different roles, James McAvoy, that man, he's done Split. He's just a great actor in general, and he can give life to multiple characters at the same time, and he's just insanely charismatic, just as Tamora Morrison is. So it feels like a no-brainer to put James McAvoy in Star Wars. Next one is Palpatine. Gotta cast Palpatine again, and obviously Ian McDiarmid's played that role for a very long time. He's a Scottish man, and I had to go with another Scot. I went with John Hannah, who I know from The Mummy, 1999 Mummy Returns. He is a Scot. He's extremely charismatic, but he's also done very serious things too, and you want someone who's charismatic, kind of funny, someone compelling, who can turn to the dark side, have that disgusting turn, and he can possess that. I think if you're funny, you also have that charisma and you have the drama. So it's like that darkness is there, and he gets skewed to that, and he would have been fantastic. I would have loved to have seen him as Palpatine. He would have brought something to it, and I feel like I'm fighting for him, but it's just like as soon as you saw him doing it, it's like, oh yeah, that's the guy, that's the right person for that role. And last but not least, certainly not least, I just would have loved to have seen Ahsoka. Even though Clone Wars came out 3 years after this movie, Ahsoka's someone who's crucial to this story. And I'll talk about it in a minute, because I got to get up on my soapbox first, because I do have a soapbox today. And this soapbox take is, it's got a few crates. Quite a few crates, because I feel nervous saying this, but CGI Yoda is good. I like him. I've always loved him. And I have to speak my truth, because CGI Yoda is awesomeness. You cannot get a puppet to fight like that. And George Lucas was pushing the envelope yet again when it came to the filmmaking, and I love CGI Yoda. I have no issue with bringing back Mr. Puppet, Frank Oz, and Last Jedi, but I think an artful mix of the two would have been my way of doing it. But CGI Yoda is awesome, and I don't want to get roasted for that, but I don't think there's a reason to be roasted. Like, he's such a different character in the prequels that needs to have a physicality, and they gave him a fantastic physicality, in my opinion. So CGI Yoda is awesome. I don't want to hear otherwise. I do want to use this time for Soapbox to add in just a little bit of pain. Meaning, if you haven't seen Clone Wars, the show, they do come to the end of that show at the same time as Revenge of the Sith is happening. And this is the end of the Clone Wars. Exact same time, and the last 4 episodes of that show go into the same era. And I was talking about Ahsoka, and she is Anakin's Padawan, and she has her own great storyline that goes through the Clone Wars show, the Rebels show. She has her own live-action show, Ahsoka. I'm not going to get into all that. I don't agree with small things towards the Ahsoka part, but I love her presence through it all. At the end of the Clone Wars, she's coming back and helping out with Mandalore, and she has a role there. And she's with her clone trooper brothers again, the people that she grew up with, and they paint their helmets in her honor, like that orange that she is. They paint it onto their helmet, and it's just such a beautiful, emotional moment. And they have the siege on Mandalore. They get Mandalore back. Ahsoka fights Darth Maul and gets Mandalore back, gets him confined, and then something happens. They feel a disturbance in the Force, and Palpatine, Vader turns to the dark side. Order 66 comes, and all those who loved Ahsoka and all those who Ahsoka loved turn on her. And this exemplifies what happens through the galaxy, that every other Jedi who has a relationship with these brethren that have fought by their side, just breaks your heart to see them turn around and have to follow these implant chips that they have and perpetrate violence on those they love. And she gets the chip out of Captain Rex, but not everybody survives the ordeal. And the end of the show ultimately is that Ahsoka and Rex bury everybody, all the other clone troopers. They bury her brothers, along with her lightsabers, and they leave. And they don't come back. It's Vader who comes back months later. It's just lush snow everywhere, and he's there with troopers, and he goes to the graves of the 501, the ones that Anakin knew all too well, and he finds the sabers of his lost Padawan. Vader turns him on, and it's just turns him off. He turns around, goes into the snow, and disappears into the fog, and it ends. And it's such a somber and painful ending, and it's a level of pain that I want to share with everybody, that even if I've told you what it is, you should go and watch it, because the season 7 animation work is fantastic. Those last 4 episodes complement Revenge of the Sith so well, and I had watched them. I watched 1 before the movie, and then 3 of them afterwards, and 2 of them afterwards, and the emotion of Revenge of the Sith hits all that much harder watching it all together at one time. So highly I recommend watching it, even though I've talked about it just now. That being said, I think that show deserved accolades. I think this deserves some sort of recognition too for the great technical work. And I'm getting into the Oscars now for 2005 movies, 2006 Oscars. This is the year Crash came out, that won Best Picture. I'm not talking about the Cronenberg one. I'm talking about the 2005 one. I want to talk about the movies that came out in 2005 because this is a crazy list of movies. Listen to this, y'all. Good Night and Good Luck. George Clooney. Awesome movie. He's actually resurrected that story and brought it back to Broadway, and they're making money on that. But Memoirs of a Geisha, awesome. Brokeback Mountain, awesome. Capote, awesome. Munich, Walk the Line. Pride and Prejudice, Cinderella Man, Ron Howard. A History of Violence, David Cronenberg. Squid and the Whale, Noah Baumbach. War of the Worlds, Spielberg. We already had Munich, Spielberg. 2 double Spielberg here. Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. King Kong. Batman Begins. The New World, Terrence Malick. Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. We got Greta's one coming. But just in general, it's such a illustrious year of movies, and it's like, it's a perfect example of like, sometimes the Oscars don't get this stuff right, and they definitely didn't this year. But I would have nominated this movie for sound editing and sound mixing. I just saw this movie in Dolby Atmos, and the mix is fantastic. You gotta create so many sounds for these movies, and they put it all together. They have the John Williams score blaring perfectly. It's awesome. Art direction would have gotten a nom right away for me. Boquette's work is fantastic in this. John Knoll and his team were not nominated for visual effects. King Kong, Narnia, and War of the Worlds were nominated, but this was not, which is baffling to me because I think they're all fantastic visually, visual effects wise. Obviously, I will yell from the top of the mountains, we need to give Oscar nominations, wins to John Williams. But the crazy part is Brokeback Mountain, Gustavo Santaolalla. Totally just butchered that man's name, but Gustavo won. The nominations were Dario Marianelli, fantastic. I love his V for Vendetta score, but he was nominated for Pride and Prejudice here. Alberto Iglesias for The Constant Gardener. And then Memoirs of a Geisha, John Williams. Munich, John Williams. And just throw in another one. Give him a triple nom for John Williams for Munich, Memoirs, and Revenge of the Sith. Come on, y'all. And it's just, it says something about the pure energy and emotionality that John Williams brings to his work, because Munich, Memoirs, and Revenge are all deeply emotional movies, and he lands the plane on every single one of them. He's the GOAT. He's always going to be the GOAT. That is his legacy, and there's a lot of legacies because time is always the truth teller. There's a specific group of people who have grown up with this movie, and a lot of them are adults now, and now it feels like the love for Revenge of the Sith is more apparent. This movie made $55 million on a re-release 20 years later, and that says something about the fantastic culture of this movie. And, you know, I don't want to sparse the negative part of the culture, but it just says something that there's such a unbridled need to go see Star Wars, to see these stories on the big screen. And it's been 6 years since they made a movie for Star Wars on the big screen, and I'd be lying if I said I'm excited for Sean Levy and Ryan Gosling's movie. I just want to see more stories that are enduring from Star Wars, but it just feels like it's so rare to get now. And my companion for this is one of those. But for legacies, a lot of these people have grown, and they're nerds who became nerds because of Star Wars and worked on Star Wars, and they've made me fall in love with science and cinema at the same time. The late, great Grant Imahara, Adam Savage, they both worked on the prequels and later on Mythbusters, obviously, and I knew their work, and they just always had such a great energy. John Knoll, who still works at ILM to this day, he's the inspiration for Rogue One, and like he came up with the idea, he pitched it to Kathleen Kennedy, and they took it from there, right? And now we have that movie, we have Andor. It's given such a life to Star Wars in a way I never expected. Todd Vaziri, who works at ILM from everything from Star Trek to Speed Racer, Avatar, Transformers, just a cool person who works at Industrial Light and Magic to this day, who worked on this, who shares the perspective of how they cook the chili at ILM, so always loves hearing from him. Production designer Gavin Boquet, still working, loved his work on Jingle Jangle, Christmas movie that was on Netflix. He's doing Silo right now for Apple. I would prefer if his work was on the big screen. He's definitely got great knack for the work that he does. And that's just, for me, it's just a lot of people have worked on or worked with George Lucas and people like him who pushed the medium forward and one way, shape, or form have a level of creativity that most folks aren't having today. And that is, for me, the reason why he is the MVP. You know, you're the MVP, Mom, as KD says. It's like, who put this enterprise together for me? And without him, for better or for worse, this is George Lucas's baby. That this is him completing a portion of a story that he's wanted to tell, and it works. It definitely works. And for me, it feels like rewatching the movie. It's like, if he didn't have to appease to the standards of dialogue as much, he might have pushed something even more artistically compelling. And I think he is always pushing the medium when he was working, and VFX really wouldn't exist without him pushing his collaborators and starting ILM and trying to figure out a way to tell these stories that he wanted to tell. And they all start from such a innate place, in my opinion, of stories of hope and the simple things of kind of pulpy stories and World War II dogfights in space, that sort of vibe. It's just like there's something there that creatively there's a texture and a mechanism to explore within the emotions that those things bring to us. There's such a thrill brought. And those thrills, like I was talking about George Miller, it's like you chase those thrills and you share them. And I feel the thrill of the chase too. It's really gotten to me since watching Revenge of the Sith again on the big screen. Such a great time talking about this movie, but companion pieces for me, obviously, go watch the original trilogy. Go watch Star Wars Rebels if you like compelling stories about rebellion. And the other half of the rebellion story to me is the newly finished Andor. That's why, if you're watching this on video, I look drastically different as I kind of sat on it for a minute, because Andor finished, and it's the attempt of almost 25 hours of work to craft and tell a story about revolution that reflects the stories of revolution in real life in the way that we've maybe never gotten before in cinema, in pop culture. And it's something beautifully emotional and effective that I can't recommend enough. So I don't know if, Hollywood's really giving anybody this level of artistic freedom anymore on the big screen, but they give it to them on the level of streaming now. But it's just, currently I don't see someone being able to get $100 million to do what Lucas did. But I feel like it's going to shift and it's going to happen again, and studios will try to make bold and original work because it was before, and these things happen in cycles at times. But it's like, I'm talking about George Lucas, I just talked about George Miller, we have James Cameron, we have Scorsese, Spielberg, people pushing it. But who's next? And I want to see who's next. And those voices excite me. They make me enthusiastic, and rebellions are built on hope. And all I can say is welcome to the rebellion. I'll see you next time. Peace and love, y'all.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Cinema Pursuit. Cinema Pursuit is produced by Katie Nadell, Zach Nadell, and Vikash Patel. Special thanks to Cole Cooper for the intro and outro music. You can listen to Cinema Pursuit on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever else you may listen to podcasts. Follow us on TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram at Cinema Pursuit Podcast, Twitter or X at Cin Pursuit Pod, and check out our subreddit, r/Cinema Pursuit.